Okay, so today we're going to be talking about microchannel. Kind of just maybe by a quick show of hands. Anybody in this room, I talked to these guys already a little bit earlier. Has everybody in this room had any opportunity at all to this point to install some microchannel stuff out in the field? So at any point, if you have a question, again, don't think to yourself that you want to wait for an appropriate time to ask a question. It's really kind of an open forum kind of vibe, if you will. I'll just go along, but anytime if you have a question, by all means ask it. And I'll certainly try to keep my eye on the clock. I usually don't like to go for more than about an hour and then give you guys a break. Yes?
What is Formicary?
Okay, Formicary Corrosion. Formicary Corrosion is kind of the hot button title that was assigned to the degradation of copper that we were seeing in the build of traditional copper fin and tube coils. Back about 2008, if memory serves, we began to get reports from you guys, reports from the field, where copper fin and tube, more traditional style of design and builds of copper fin and tube coils, those were beginning to develop leaks, and they were developing leaks in a time frame where we were rather shocked. We were getting reports of coils that had only maybe been in for upwards of 2 seasons, and guys were having to go back out like on a no cooling call, and they discovered the thing was low on charge. And when it comes to a situation like that, it always seems like you have kind of a 50-50 split. You'll have guys that do a charge and go, if you will. They'll basically pump the thing back up and they get on down the road. And then you have guys that kind of really have a deeper understanding of 410A. And 410A is known industry-wide as a hygroscopic refrigerant. So it has an affinity to want to attract moisture and then hang on to that moisture. If you develop a leak in a 410A system, that's really not a trivial matter. That's actually a fairly serious matter that you don't want to ignore going into the weeks and the months ahead, particularly like if you're at the start of a cooling season. If it's June and you come across a system that's low on charge, that's not something that you want to do a charge and go on and hoping to kind of see how are we going to do. Are we going to make it all the way through the summer? Is this going to be one of those systems where I hit the thing with a pound or two every spring and then it sails right through the summer and has no issues? The fact that 410A can so easily attract and hold on to moisture makes that a situation where you want to handle leaks with kind of a greater sense of urgency, if you will. But Formicary Corrosion was really the prime motivator that started us wanting to look at using an alternative material that obviously was cost effective, that would give us that resistance to the types of chemical reactions that we would see happen in the copper supplies that we were able to purchase and use in manufacturing, but not sacrifice the performance of the systems, because it wouldn't do us any good to go to an alternative material if it ended up curbing our numbers so severely that we were going to have to go to extreme lengths on the other end. Like, if we use a material where we suddenly were not going to be able to make the numbers without instantly having to say, well, we're going to have to go to an ECM motor then in this matchup, or we're going to have to do a TXV and an ECM, or we're going to have to increase the footprint size of this. It doesn't do us any good to do that, right? You guys remember, I know you do, you guys remember when 13 Sears started to take over? What was the very first thing that you remember seeing happen with the footprint, the physical dimensions of the average condenser outside?
Larger.
It got larger, right? And where I hail from, lots of people have a fenced backyard. It was not uncommon for us to have to start a retrofit install where we were going to be replacing a high side and a coil, where 4 guys were going to have to show up at that address in the morning, first thing. It was only going to take one guy to be able to recover the refrigerant, disconnect the electrical, disconnect the line sets, and be able to get that thing on a dolly and get it through the gate and get it out to the curb so that our guys, you know, our warehouse guys could pick it up. But it was going to take 4 guys to show up at that address because we were going to have to lift that replacement condenser up and over because it wasn't going to fit through the gate. The other thing too, I don't know if they do it, you know, a similar style here as far as your service area, but where I come from, it's very, very popular to place the condenser on a steel frame. What they do, lots of people will have a walkout basement, and so when you pull up in front of a house, you're looking across the front yard and you see the condenser sitting on the side of the house. You jump out of your truck, you grab your tool bags, you grab your manifold, you grab everything that you figure you're going to need to start the call. You start heading for that condenser, and the closer you get to that condenser, all of a sudden you realize you're going down grade and that condenser is staying at grade. And by the time you actually get to the condenser, that thing might be 2-3 feet over your head. Well, obviously you guys can realize I'm a short guy to begin with. If I had to do service work on a 5-ton condenser that was sitting up on a rack, I had a whale of a time getting into that thing. So that's another thing that really drove the further development of Microchannel, was that we did not want to go into a material that was going to compromise what we were going to have to do with footprint and everything else, if you will. So in 2009, we start to develop Microchannel in terms of the straight cool condenser coil, so that's what became the KB series. And then in 2010 is when we start to produce the evaporator coils. In 2012 is when it starts to go into the B6 series of air handlers and the C7 coil models. Really what I would want to highlight in this information, a lot of guys have this idea that the materials that we're using here, that this is all new, that this is somehow experimental. It is not. Is it as old as, say, the traditional copper fin-in tube manufacturing process of the design, if you will? No, it is not. But it's not something that we just came up with, you know, a year ago, and we're still trying to get the kinks worked out of it. We are always constantly evolving in terms of optimizing the design and manufacture of something. You know, you will see changes happen to everything in the line. I do not want you to see this example of this evaporator here today and think that this is what you're going to be looking at for the rest of your days to come with this product, because that is not the case at all. So Formicary corrosion, basically Formicary corrosion, the easiest way that I can describe that is it's basically like tooth decay. Once that copper begins to degrade like that, you'll begin to get little tiny pinhole leaks. That was another thing that drove you guys just absolutely bonkers. For a long time, like the compressor manufacturers would say, the only thing that we allow to pump through that compressor is going to be oil and refrigerant. That's it, that's all. So you didn't have a lot of options in terms of things like, you know, leak dye, what have you. So you were reliant on, you don't want to do anything that voids any warranty, so you guys were relying upon, electronic means of leak detection and the good old-fashioned soap bubbles. Well, with Formicary corrosion, when that copper would begin to degrade like that, it made finding those leaks, it made that a very, very long, drawn-out, frustrating process. Guys would spend an hour doing a leak search. They couldn't find the thing at all. So they were like, you know, A, I can't spend all day here. B, I can't hand this homeowner a bill for $350 or $400 and basically say, this is the best that I could do. I believe you still have a leak. We'll see how it does, and I'll have to come back if necessary. You know, that just doesn't translate, and it doesn't do you any good, right? But that was really one of the more frustrating things in terms of how Formicary corrosion would affect the end result of the operation of the equipment. So when it comes to microchannel, if you will, in terms of how it's constructed, it's aluminum tubes that we extrude, and then we bond those to a liquid and a suction header tube on the opposite ends of the coil. One of the big things that really kind of got everybody excited in terms of where this technology could go is that they quickly realized that we could achieve identical or even better performance numbers, especially like with heat pumps. So like COP values, HSPF numbers, total BTU content, those numbers actually would either stay the same or increase, and you wouldn't need as much refrigerant in the system to make that happen. I want you to remember what I just said right there, because I'm going to come back to that at a certain point in the day about the amount of refrigerant that systems that are using microchannel coils actually need. It does make charging microchannel systems, that's not technology that's going to be as forgiving as like 22 systems running a recip compressor ever were. You're not going to just hook up your 410 to it and throw open the manifold and just start letting it rip and watch to see what your superheat's doing. Yes?
I know you keep saying we. I just want to clarify, everybody in the industry is going to microchannel, so it's not just a Nordyne. I mean, this is a industry-wide.
That's correct. That's a very good point. This is not something that is unique to us. This is not unique to us. Every major manufacturer out there, if they don't currently have something to market in terms of this type of technology, they've got it in the works. This is not going away. This is going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to make more inroads. You're going to have more market saturation in terms of this type of material being used, these types of designs, their application, what have you. And I'm not saying that to kind of come across as you need to wrap your arms around it or it's going to be your problem to deal with. The point that I'm trying to make is now is the time for you to begin to learn and refine your processes, your methods of how you install and service this stuff. Everybody's unique in the way that they do installs. I know that because I've knocked a lot of tin in my time. All right? Everybody's unique in terms of how they do their installs, and every single install out there, with the exception of things like, let's say, apartment complexes or condos or something like that, every single install is just like a fingerprint. It's unique unto itself. You could literally do two houses that are side by side, and I don't care if they both have 3-ton systems. They are two completely separate, completely unique 3-ton systems. You could have one house where you have got air for days. You've got a static that's running at a 0.3. And you go right next door and that thing's screaming at a 0.9 or maybe it's even over an inch. And you're trying to pull a rabbit out of the hat, trying to figure out a way that you can actually get the amount of air that you need without, telling the homeowner. So the only way this is going to happen is if we start chopping down the finished ceiling here and getting to the trunk line. I've done those jobs. That's not a fun conversation that you have to have. They are lighter weight. The systems use less refrigerant overall. We do not have to, when these fins are extruded, when we do the manufacturing process on these, because the heat transfer properties of this material actually rival or do better than copper in some cases, we don't have to try to stretch this stuff like taff, if you will. We don't have to try to make it stretch as far, if you will. So a lot of the tubing wall, the wall thickness measurements actually are higher than they are in a lot of the copper coils, which gives these a really nice rough service life, if you will. You can bang these coils around. I'll talk a little more about it later on today. The one thing initially that I would want to point out to you is definitely be protective of the liquid line and the single distributor tube on these. We are currently looking at doing some additional bracing for protection, if you will, on the liquid line. Like I said, we're always constantly looking to improve the thing, but don't get crazy with these and grab onto that liquid line almost like it's a handle, if you will, because this coil right here, I verified this yesterday with Dave just in case this wasn't supposed to be a coil that was going to get in somebody's hands. But you can just see right here, you don't have to apply a lot of torque to that thing, and you can start to get it to move. If you have a habit of using things like a suction header to grab onto that coil with, what's going to end up happening is you're going to crack that weld where we go down into the main liquid header tube. You're going to have a nice fine hairline crack there, and it's going to become one of those leaks that's going to drive you nuts, because it's not going to be intuitive for you to start looking for it there, and depending upon how it cracks and the way that your system pressures develop, it could be difficult to pinpoint that leak.
Do you foresee a problem with the density of the coil, how tight they are and getting dirty and keep them maintained and clean?
These actually on average from excuse me. These actually have, excuse me, sorry about that. On average from ton to ton, I need more coffee, hold on. Much better. Reset. These actually on average, by comparison, from tonnage to tonnage, these actually have less pressure drop than copper fin and tube coils do, because like this current design right here, this is single pass. So obviously in some cases what ends up happening in terms of the compensation there is that the coil gets taller. I mean, you guys aren't stupid. You've done enough installs. You can instantly see the difference. You know, you can go, that's a 20 install coil, that's a 25, 26 install coil. So in some cases the coil becomes taller, but because it's single pass, you don't have to have as many passes through the coil, obviously, so that the actual physical density of the coil is less, and you end up with less pressure drop on these than you do on a comparative copper fin and tube. Cleaning these, I'll kind of hit on this too a little bit as we continue to go along. A lot of guys have been concerned about how you maintain and clean these. I don't want you to have that fear. We did a lot of, you know, rather down and dirty experimentation in terms of using various types of chemicals to see if it would affect the actual you know, material hardiness, if you will, in terms of being able to clean these. We're always going to recommend that you're going to use something that's obviously approved for aluminum. We're going to recommend that you use something that's fairly neutral in terms of pH. I'm not going to want to see you trying to, you know, clean these with acid. I'm not going to want to try to see you cleaning these with things like oven cleaner type products, if you will. Lots of times I'll be asked, what do you typically like to use as an example? I like Simple Green. I like Simple Green for two reasons. The smell of it doesn't just light me up, and if I'm cleaning a coil and I happen to, you know, kick it or whatever, and it ends up, you know, half of it ends up going all over the floor, I do not immediately go into panic mode. So I learned the value of protecting the floor underneath you in somebody's home a long time ago when I was doing a rough-in to add some supply runs, and I needed to spot a joist space. So I went into their master bedroom closet, which obviously was carpeted, and that day I learned why you don't want to use even your smallest paddle bit. to have to try to spot a joist space, because literally within a breath after my bit into the subfloor, if you will, it grabbed the threading of that carpet and it ran. I couldn't let off the trigger fast enough. I mean, I'm like, boom, and that carpet went in 2 different directions, and I was like, oh my God. And I let off the trigger of my drill, and I'm looking at the carpet, and I'm just like, okay, no one's ever gonna say. I went and I told them, I'm like, I have to show you something, and you're gonna not be happy. She was just like, I don't even see what you're talking about. But that's why